Alright folks, so this is the brand new Garmin Forerunner 265, and what they've done is take all the great functionality from their Forerunner 255 Music. The ability to track tons of different activities, including triathlon, dual band satellite systems mode for increased GPS accuracy, the huge amount of training feedback it provides, and combine that all with an AMOLED display. The same kind of display that's actually found on their Venue series as well as their high-end Garmin Epics, and also the same kind of display technology that's used on Apple Watches as well as Samsung watches. Garmin's Forerunner lineup has long had memory and pixel or transflective displays for years and years, and for good reason. They're really good from a sports perspective where they look amazing outdoors in direct sunlight, but they also don't consume all that much power, resulting in longer battery life. But Garmin has made some really big strides with their AMOLED displays with their Venue series as well as their Epics, where they're able to deliver very bright and readable displays while still being able to deliver very respectable battery life. And if the popularity of the Epics has shown, it's definitely proven to be very useful for sports in the outdoors. And to further prove that point, alongside this 265, today Garmin's also launching their Forerunner 965, which is basically the AMOLED version of their higher-end 955. The 965 is basically the bigger brother to the 265 with some additional features, and if you're interested to know what the 965 is all about, I've got another full in-depth review of this watch, link down in the description below, as well as my full in-depth comparison of the 265 versus the 965, which you can check out once you're done over here. Alright, so let's get to talking about this new Forerunner 265. So in essence, the 265 is the AMOLED version of their Forerunner 255 Music, and the 255 was a huge upgrade from the previous generation 245, where they added an altimeter, they have full triathlon and multi-sport support, including the ability to track tons of other types of activities, of course. They provide a bunch of training performance feedback. They have Garmin Pay, music storage and playback on the music versions, and tons more. They actually made their own Forerunner 745 kind of obsolete with the 255. That's how many features they threw in. And the same thing goes for the 265, where it has all the same features, but with the 265, you actually may want to think of it as a slightly more premium 255 because all the Forerunner 265s, they all come with music. There isn't a non-music version like there is on the 255. Plus, there's also an additional training performance feedback feature that's been added to the 265 that we'll talk about here in just one bit. So the new Forerunner 265 comes in two different sizes, a 265 and a 265S, and the 265 has a 46mm case and the 265S has a 41.7mm case. The dimensions are nearly the same as the 255 and 255S, where the 255 is a hair smaller at 45.6mm for the case, and then the 255S having a 41mm case. The thickness remains the same on the larger of the two at 12.9mm, and the 255S is just a hair thinner at 12.4mm versus 12.9mm on the 265S, virtually the same in terms of dimensions and weights overall. And then for weight, the larger 265 weighs 47 grams, and then the 265S weighs 39 grams, which is nearly identical to the 255 and 255S at 49 grams and 39 grams respectively. And for wearability, this is the larger Forerunner 265 on my 185mm circumference wrist, and it fits me well, but for people who do prefer a smaller watch, you do have the option of the 265S. And the watch band that comes with the 265 is a really nice band, and they went with this kind of duotone design, which is pretty cool. It's super comfortable, it's nice and stretchy, it's just a great band, but if you'd like to switch it out, you totally can, as it's the industry standard band. The big difference though with the 265 is really the display, where the Forerunner 265 uses a bright and crispy AMOLED display versus the transflective or memory and pixel that's found on the Forerunner 255. And with this kind of display, it produces super vibrant colors and lots of contrast, basically what you're used to with something like a smartphone, and it's kind of just hard to deny that everything just pops with this AMOLED display where there's tons of detail in many areas in the interface. And for comparison, the Forerunner 255 has a resolution of 260 by 260 pixels, and the Forerunner 265 has a 416 by 416 pixels. And then the Forerunner 255S has a resolution of 218 by 218 pixels, and then the 265S has 360 by 360 pixels. So basically lots more pixels, and it really does show when you're using the watch. You may also notice that they revamped the user interface a bit here too, where it's kind of a blend of what you'd find on an Epics and the Venue, where they're really taking full advantage of all those extra pixels with lots of detail and colors throughout the interface. The advantage with memory and pixel or transflected displays though with the Forerunner 255 is that they are extremely easy to read outdoors in direct sunlight. In fact, they get even better with more and more light. What AMOLED displays have to do though is that they actually need to pump up the brightness quite a bit to overcome the bright conditions, but the good news is this display gets super bright on the 265, so although it's not maybe quite as good as a transflective outdoors, it still works perfectly. That AMOLED display is going to be protected by Gorilla Glass 3, similar to what you find on the 255, and also what's similar is that it's water resistant down to 5 ATM. Another thing that comes alongside the AMOLED display is that it has a touchscreen, and what's cool about what Garmin's done with their touchscreen implementation on the 265 as well as the 965 is that they give you a choice of how and when you want to use it. Longtime Forerunner users are used to tried and true physical buttons because they simply do work better in most sports scenarios. And don't worry, you can still totally just use physical buttons if you don't want to use the touchscreen. What they've done is make sure that you can do pretty much anything that you can do with the touchscreen with a button and vice versa. Whatever you can do with a button, you can also do with the touchscreen. And you can even customize these settings on both a global level as well as a per activity level. So what you can do here is have it enabled for something like indoor cycling, but maybe not for running. Oh, and really quick, if you're finding the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button down below. It's a small little thing that'll help this video and the channel quite a bit, and I appreciate it. Now, with AMOLED displays, one drawback is that they do consume more battery life than a transflected display. So in an effort to conserve battery power, they have both a gesture mode where the display turns off after a certain amount of time, and then to wake it up, you just turn your wrist. Or you also do have an always on display mode, which dims the display to a lower brightness when not in use. And this is for both general watch use as well as workouts where the display can dim so you can kind of easily take a look at your watch at a glance. And another way they've taken advantage of all these pixels on the AMOLED display is that they have a boatload of new watch faces, which in my opinion are probably some of the best looking stock Garmin watch faces I've seen yet. I usually have like maybe a handful I like, but I sort of had a hard time choosing between all these. And then for battery life, the great thing is that Garmin's been able to optimize their AMOLED display technology to get very decent battery life, where the 265 can get around 2 weeks of battery life as a smartwatch without using the always-on display. However, when you enable the always-on display, that's where battery life drops down to about 5 days. Definitely less than without the always-on display, but much better than what you can get out of a typical smartwatch like an Apple Watch or Samsung Watch, where those usually only last anywhere from like 1 to 3 days. And then for battery life for recording outdoor activities, for the most part, similar numbers to the 255 and the 255S, with the exception of the GPS only mode where the 255 series can squeeze out a bit more. But for the higher accuracy settings, like using their dual band satellite system mode, it's actually pretty similar. And for a real life example of battery life, I was nearly able to get that 5 days of battery life, around 4.5 days using the always on display mode. And that was even with recording about 6 hours of outdoor activities in the highest accuracy dual band mode, which actually takes a little bit more battery life, as well as I think around 5 hours of indoor activities. I did have the brightness set at the lowest brightness setting though, but I do find that to be plenty bright. And then for a real life example of battery life recording an outdoor activity, before this ride, I started out at 55%. And after this 2 hour and 45-minute road ride, I had 40% remaining. And this was using the highest accuracy dual band setting, like I was mentioning earlier, as well as using the always on display set to 2/3 brightness. So doing the rough math, it used 15%, which comes out to be about 5.45% per hour, meaning that in theory, you could record up to 18 hours, which actually exceeds their claim. Garmin actually tends to be a little bit conservative on their battery life claims, and that seems to also be true with the 265. Good stuff. You may notice though that the 265S actually gets longer battery life than the larger 265 in some scenarios, and the reason for this is that they both share the same size battery, and since the 265S uses a smaller display, it doesn't use as much power. Still though, the battery life expectations are still quite good out of both of these. The Forerunner 265 uses the same standard Garmin charging port as the 255, but the 265 does actually come with an updated USB-C charging cable versus the USB Type-A that they've included before. The USB-C cable, by the way, doesn't seem to charge watches any faster though, as I did test that out with a bunch of other watches and the charging times were all pretty similar across the board. And then on the smartwatch side of things, the 265 has basically all the same features as the 255 Music. So when you have it paired with either an iPhone or an Android phone, you'll be able to receive notifications for apps, texts, calls, and you can get weather information that's synced for your phone, and you can also view calendar events. However, if you have it paired with an Android phone, you'll actually have the ability to reply to texts and calls with predefined responses that you can set up in Garmin Connect. And the reason you can't do this when you pair it with an iPhone is that Apple actually locks down that reply functionality to just Apple Watches. And then, like I was mentioning earlier, the Forerunner 265, all of them come with offline music storage and playback with music services like Spotify, Deezer, Amazon Music, where you can store up to 500 songs for offline listening with a pair of Bluetooth earbuds without having to bring your phone with you on your run or your ride. The Forerunner 255, on the other hand, comes in either a music version or a non-music version, but they just decided to go all music with the 265. Again, kind of a nod to the fact that they're positioning the 265 as a slightly higher end model in the whole scheme of things. For daily health and activity tracking, the 265 is similar to the 255, where it can track your heart rate 24 hours a day. It can track your SpO2 or blood oxygen saturation levels. It tracks your steps. It also can track your floors climbed throughout the day since it has an altimeter. It tracks your intensity minutes, which is basically how many minutes you spend doing vigorous exercise. It has Garmin's body battery metric, which gives you an indication of your energy levels throughout the day based on workouts and sleep, as well as our health snapshot feature, which can collect numerous health metrics at one time, including your heart rate, SpO2, respiration rate, and stress level. Oh, and then it also does have Garmin's advanced sleep tracking, which will give you a sleep score along with tracking sleep stages. But just note that the Forerunner 265 doesn't have ECG app functionality because it doesn't have the necessary hardware like is available on the Venue 2 Plus. On the sports and fitness side of things, the 265 has all the same features as the 255, so it has tons of different sport profiles with everything that you can expect, like running both indoors and outdoors, including trail running and an ultra running profile, plenty of cycling profiles, including mountain biking, e-biking, and indoor cycling, where you can pair up a smart bike trainer. It has pool swimming, open water swimming, triathlon and multi-sport support, outdoor recreation profiles like skiing and snowboarding, water sports like stand-up paddleboarding and rowing, as well as plenty of gym profiles including strength training, high-intensity interval training, and yoga. And then on the training and performance feedback side of things, the 265, just like the 255, comes with VO2 max estimation for running as well as cycling. It also has a race predictor for common running race distances based on your running history. It has training status based on your VO2 max trends, HRV status, and training load. But something new to come with the 265 is actually training readiness, which was originally launched with their 955 last year. So training readiness is a pretty cool feature, and you can think of this as basically a more advanced body battery where it takes in multiple factors to give you a readiness level or score for your next training session based on your last night's sleep, current recovery time from your last training session, HRV status, acute training load, sleep history, as well as stress history. Oh, and by the way, the reason it says not enough data here on the HRV status is that the 265 was actually paired with a backup Garmin Connect account that I have that I don't use regularly, but this is what it looks like in the 965, which is paired to my primary Garmin Connect account. And training readiness is probably one of my favorite new features to come out with the Garmin device in recent times, and it does really give you a pretty easy to understand number based on all those factors that do make an impact on how ready you may be for your next training session. And yes, by the way, that truly is my readiness level right now as I've been overtraining lately, or another way to put it is that I've been testing these watches really thoroughly. Now, training readiness is a new feature that's coming out with the 265, but this feature won't be backported to the 255. In their mind, the 265 isn't necessarily just a 255 with AMOLED display, but it is just a slightly more premium option. And since you're paying a little bit more, you'll also get a little bit more in terms of features. Another new feature to come with the Forerunner 265 is that you're now able to collect running dynamics like vertical oscillation, vertical ratio, and ground contact time from the watch itself without having to have an accessory like an HRM Pro Plus heart rate strap. Previously, you were only able to collect cadence and stride length as additional running metrics beyond just pace, speed, and distance, but now you can get these additional metrics from the watch itself. And with this sort of data, you can use these to better assess your running form. So for instance, with vertical ratio, you can use this to figure out if your upward momentum is more than your forward momentum while running, which can be an indication that you could be more efficient with the nature of your stride. One thing to note here, though, is that if you do use something like an HRM Pro heart rate strap, you also get ground contact time balance, which shows how much time you're spending on the ground with each foot independently. Another thing that's sort of new with the 265 is it also collects running power from the wrist, again without an accessory. This was an update to the 255 though since it was first launched, which is kind of why I say it's sort of new, but it's just something that's completely native now with the 265. It just collects running power without an accessory or anything like that. And with running power, this is just another data point that you can use for your training. So the purpose of running power is to kind of provide a more equal point of reference in regards to the work involved to propel yourself forward. So you can think about it this way. So we all know about pace, where that's how fast we're going. And well, we all want to go faster and hit certain paces, and that works great if we're on flat ground with no wind. The problem, however, is when we take into account those additional factors. So if we're running into a headwind up a hill, our pace is naturally going to be slower, even if we're putting out the same amount of effort on flat ground. So that's kind of where running power comes into play, where it is measuring the amount of force or work we're putting out at a given time. And then on the sports accuracy side of things, we're basically generally concerned with about two different things, GPS accuracy as well as heart rate accuracy. But I also have some examples of altimeter accuracy, since that can be an important metric for trail runners and cyclists, and the 265 does have an altimeter. And in regards to GPS accuracy, the 265, just like the 255, has a dual band GPS chipset, which allows the watch to leverage two different satellite frequencies at one time, which leads to greater accuracy in challenging environments like around really tall buildings and a lot of heavy tree cover. And with all previous Garmin's that I've tested with this same GPS chipset, it's quite accurate. And let's just go ahead and see how the 265 did as well. So on this run here, the 265 was basically right in line with all the other test devices I was using. Really good stuff. And then for the finer detail of the GPS tracks, quite simply, the 265 did great. On all the straight sections, it was super crispy and it didn't wander. And then on all these curved sections of path, it followed them along basically perfectly. And then for a longer example for a road ride, on this 50-mile ride, it matched up very well to all the other test devices I was using. And I also wanted to point out that it tracked the elevation gain well with its built-in altimeter compared to both Strava's corrected elevation figure as well as the other devices. And then taking a closer look at the GPS tracks, the 265 was picture perfect on this ride. I mean, I scoured and scoured over this ride, and I was seriously not coming up with anything that was kind of a miss. It did great. And then for heart rate accuracy, the 265 uses Garmin's 4th generation Elevate heart rate sensor, the same one that's used in the 965, the 955, their higher-end Phoenix series, is pretty much all of Garmin's current higher-end watches. And I've gotten really good results out of it in the past, so let's see how the 265 did. So starting out with some running, here's a simple steady state run, and as you can see, the 265 did great here. And then here's a steady state indoor bike ride, and as you can see, things look really good here as well. And you can barely even tell a difference here actually between it and the external chest and arm heart rate monitors I was using as references. And for something a little bit more exciting, here's another ride, but this time around the 265 had some intervals to deal with, but it did great. It did have about a 30 to 40 second period here at the beginning though, where it took a moment to lock on a heart rate, which can happen from time to time with wrist-based optical heart rate sensors, but after that, it was rock solid. Now, taking it outside for some road biking, this is where we start to introduce more variables for these kind of sensors to work with, including vibrations and bumps in the road, which can throw off optical heart rate sensors on watches because they just simply don't like a lot of movement. But the 265 did a pretty good job handling it for the most part. It's definitely not as spot on as the indoor biking, which we just saw earlier, but that's kind of be expected. But overall, on the majority of the ride, it did very well, even with plenty of changes in heart rate. It did have some moments where it was a little bit shaky right here, and there was also this portion right here when I stopped where it read low, but other than that, this is actually a very respectable result for road biking. So the Forerunner 265 may just be a Forerunner 255 with an AMOLED display, but I think it's actually just a bit more important than that. So it's combining all the advanced sports functionality of the 255 with the bright and crispy AMOLED display that's found in the Venue 2, something that I think is really going to appeal to a lot of you out there. It's very much a case of having your cake and eating it too. It does come at a slightly higher price tag though, so the 265 runs $449, which is $50 more than the 255 Music, which for that AMOLED display and the additional training readiness feature seems like a pretty good deal to me. Anyhow, if you have any questions about the 265 that I didn't cover in this video, make sure to leave a comment in the comment section down below. And if you're interested in the differences between the 265 and the 965, I've also got that full in-depth comparison that you can check out now that you're done over here. And if you found the information in this video useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos just like this that are coming soon. Happy running, and we will see you in the next video.